spoke to its owner. It was a cold November evening in the small town of Ashwood, Ohio. The air carried an unusual stillness, as if nature itself hesitated to breathe. At 7:13 p.m., Jonathan Monroe arrived at his new home after months of searching for the perfect place. He had purchased the charming two-story house on Elm Street just 3 days ago, excited about starting a new chapter in his life. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? As Jonathan unpacked his belongings, he noticed something peculiar about the house. The wooden floors creaked with a distinct pattern that almost sounded like whispers. Just old house settling, he told himself, with a nervous chuckle. But the feeling persisted. It was as if the house was watching him, studying his every move. At exactly midnight, when the grandfather clock in the living room struck 12, Jonathan heard a faint voice coming from the walls. It wasn't loud enough to be alarming, but clear enough to make his blood run cold. "Welcome home," it said softly, as if the very fabric of the house was speaking to him. His heart raced, and he found himself glancing around the dimly lit room, trying to locate the source of the sound. Pause for dramatic effect. The next morning, Jonathan decided to investigate further. He walked through each room, noticing how the sunlight seemed to avoid certain corners, casting long shadows even at noon. In the basement, he discovered strange markings on the walls, symbols that looked ancient and otherworldly. As he traced one of the symbols with his finger, the temperature dropped suddenly, and he felt a presence behind him. Turning quickly, he saw nothing but the empty space where he had stood moments ago. That night, at precisely 2:47 a.m., the voices returned. This time, they were more insistent, calling out his name in a tone that sent shivers down his spine. "Jonathan?" "Stay," the voice whispered, followed by a low, guttural laugh that echoed through the house. He tried to sleep, pulling the blankets tightly around him, but the sounds continued. Footsteps on the ceiling above his bedroom, doors creaking open and shut despite being securely locked. Over the following days, the phenomena escalated. Objects would move on their own, appearing in different places than where he had left them. A porcelain vase he kept on the dining table would find its way to the kitchen counter every morning, no matter how many times he returned it to its original spot. The mirrors in the house showed reflections that weren't quite right, sometimes showing an extra figure standing behind him when he was alone. One afternoon, while exploring the attic, Jonathan found an old journal hidden beneath some dusty boxes. The entries dated back to the early 1900s and belonged to a previous owner named Henry Caldwell. The writings detailed similar experiences, voices in the walls, moving objects, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. The final entry, written in shaky handwriting, read, "I can't escape it anymore. The house knows me better than I know myself. It speaks to me now, not just in words, but in feelings. I fear what comes next." As the days turned into weeks, Jonathan realized the house was changing him. He began hearing the voices even outside its walls, as if the house had extended its influence beyond its physical boundaries. His dreams became vivid and unsettling, filled with images of faces peering through walls and hands reaching out from shadowy corners. Pause for emphasis. On December 15th, at 3:18 a.m., everything came to a head. The house seemed alive, pulsating with energy that made the lights flicker uncontrollably. The voices grew louder, overlapping each other in a cacophony of whispers and laughter. Jonathan found himself drawn to the living room, where the grandfather clock had stopped ticking. Standing before it, he felt a connection to the house that went beyond mere ownership. It was as if they shared a consciousness. "Who are you?" he asked aloud, his voice trembling. The answer came not from words, but from a deep understanding that filled his mind. The house wasn't just a structure, it was a living entity that had existed long before its physical form. It had absorbed the memories, emotions, and experiences of every person who had ever lived within its walls, creating a collective consciousness that transcended time. In that moment, Jonathan understood why the house had chosen him. It needed someone who could listen, truly listen, to its story. And though the realization brought both terror and wonder, he knew he couldn't leave. The house had become part of him, just as he had become part of it. Their fates were intertwined in ways he could never have imagined when he first stepped through its doors. As dawn broke over Ashwood, Jonathan sat in the living room, staring at the now silent grandfather clock. The voices had quieted, but he could still feel their presence, like a gentle hum beneath the surface of reality. The house continued to speak to him, not through words, but through the subtle movements of its walls, the shifting patterns of its shadows, and the ever-present awareness that he was never truly alone. The witch who tormented a family for years. The witch who tormented a family for years. It was an ordinary evening in the small town of Elmwood, nestled deep within the heart of New England. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple. A chill ran through the air as autumn leaves swirled gently around the old oak tree standing tall at the corner of Maple Street. This was where it all began, a tale that would haunt the memories of one family forever. Mrs. Eleanor Carter, a kind-hearted woman in her late 40s, lived with her husband Robert and their two children, Emily and Thomas, in a modest home on Maple Street. Their house stood quietly among others, its white picket fence framing a garden filled with blooming flowers during warmer months. But this particular night felt different. There was an eerie stillness in the air, as though nature itself held its breath. Eleanor noticed it first when she heard faint whispers coming from the attic. At first, she thought it might be the wind playing tricks on her ears, or perhaps the old pipes groaning under pressure. She dismissed it and continued preparing dinner for her family. However, as the hours passed, the whispers grew louder, almost rhythmic, like someone chanting softly but deliberately. Robert, who had been reading the newspaper by the fireplace, looked up sharply when he too heard the sound. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice tinged with curiosity, yet laced with unease. "Hear what?" Emily replied innocently, her young face lighting up as she played with her dolls nearby. Robert shook his head. "Nothing, sweetheart," he said, forcing a smile to reassure her. Yet, deep down, he couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. That night, sleep eluded them all. Each member of the Carter family lay awake in their beds, listening intently to the strange noises emanating from the attic. It wasn't just whispers anymore. There were tapping sounds, soft but insistent, followed by low growls that sent shivers down their spines. The atmosphere inside the house became oppressive, heavy with tension and fear. The next morning brought no relief. As Eleanor went about her daily chores, she found peculiar things happening around the house. Items were misplaced, her favorite teacup sitting atop the refrigerator, books stacked neatly in places they hadn't been before, and even the salt shaker positioned upside down on the dining table. None of these occurrences seemed accidental. They carried an air of deliberate mischief. Thomas, only 8 years old at the time, came running into the kitchen, panic evident in his wide eyes. "Mom! Mom!" he cried out, clutching a toy car tightly in his hand. "There's a shadow in my room. It moves when I'm not looking." Eleanor bent down to comfort him, her own heart pounding wildly in her chest. "It's okay, honey," she murmured soothingly. "Sometimes our minds play tricks on us." But deep down, she knew better. As days turned into weeks, the disturbances escalated. Candles flickered without cause, doors slammed shut violently despite calm weather, and cold spots appeared randomly throughout the house. One evening, while Robert was working late at his office, Eleanor decided to investigate the source of the haunting herself. Armed with nothing more than a flashlight, she ascended the creaky wooden stairs leading to the attic. The moment she stepped inside, a wave of dread washed over her. The air was thick, suffocating almost, carrying a faint smell of sulfur. Shadows danced erratically across the walls, taking shapes that defied logic. Then, amidst the chaos, she saw a Heron old woman cloaked in black, her face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Her presence radiated malevolence, striking terror into Eleanor's very soul. "Who are you?" Eleanor demanded, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound brave. The figure, laughed a chilling, guttural sound that echoed through the cramped space. "I am the guardian of this place." The woman hissed, her words dripping with venom. "And your family has trespassed upon my domain." Eleanor stumbled backward, nearly dropping her flashlight. Before she could gather her wits, the woman raised a gnarled hand, muttering words in a language unfamiliar yet unsettlingly ancient. A surge of energy coursed through the room, forcing Eleanor to flee back downstairs. When Robert returned home that night, he found Eleanor pale and shaken, recounting the horrifying encounter. Together, they sought answers, consulting local historians and folklore experts. What they discovered chilled them to the bone. Decades earlier, a witch named Agatha Blackwell had resided in their very neighborhood. Accused of practicing dark magic, she had vanished mysteriously after being ostracized by the community. Some claimed she had cursed those who dared trespass onto her land, binding her spirit to the area long after her physical form had perished. Determined to break the curse, the Carters reached out to a renowned paranormal investigator named Henry Grayson. Known for his expertise in dealing with supernatural phenomena, Grayson agreed to help them. Upon visiting the house, he immediately sensed the overwhelming presence of negative energy. He set up various equipment, including EMF detectors and thermal cameras, hoping to capture evidence of the entity plaguing the family. Over several nights, Grayson documented numerous instances of unexplained activity, disembodied voices captured on audio recordings, objects moving independently on camera, and sudden drops in temperature that coincided with sightings of the ominous figure. Yet, breaking the curse proved far more challenging than anticipated. Grayson delved deep into research, uncovering fragments of Agatha Blackwell's past. She had been a recluse, feared and misunderstood by her neighbors. Her supposed crimes included hexing livestock and causing crop failures, though much of the evidence against her stemmed from superstition rather than fact. Still, the hatred directed toward her had driven her to desperation, fueling her desire for vengeance against anyone connected to her former life. Armed with this knowledge, Grayson devised a plan. He believed that appeasing Agatha's restless spirit might ease the torment inflicted upon the Carter family. With the assistance of a local priest, Father Michael O'Connor, they performed a cleansing ritual designed to release Agatha from her earthly binds. Under the pale light of a full moon, the ritual commenced in the attic, the epicenter of Agatha's influence. Chanting prayers and burning sage, Grayson and Father O'Connor worked tirelessly, their voices steady despite the growing intensity of the supernatural forces opposing them. Objects flew across the room, furniture overturned, and the air crackled with electricity. Through sheer determination, they pressed on, refusing to yield to the mounting chaos. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the energy shifted. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a profound sense of peace. The shadows receded, and silence enveloped the house once more. Exhausted but relieved, Grayson and Father O'Connor descended the stairs to inform the Carters that the ordeal was over, or so they hoped. In the weeks following the ritual, the Carter household returned to normalcy. No longer plagued by inexplicable noises or menacing apparitions, the family breathed easier, enjoying moments together without constant dread looming over them. Yet, every now and then, Eleanor would glance nervously toward the attic door, wondering if Agatha truly remained at bay or merely biding her time. For the people of Elmwood, the story of the witch who tormented the Carter family became legend, whispered in hushed tones around campfires and shared among generations. While some dismissed it as mere myth, Others swore by its authenticity, cautioning anyone who ventured near Maple Street to tread lightly, lest they awaken the wrath of a vengeful spirit once again. The ghost who solved her own murder. The night was eerily quiet in the small town of Willow Creek. It was around 10:30 p.m. when Emily Carter, a young woman in her late 20s, returned home from a long day at work. The streets were deserted, and the only sounds were the occasional rustling of leaves in the cool autumn breeze. Emily lived alone in a modest two-story house on Maple Street, just a few blocks away from the local park where children would often play during the day. As she unlocked her front door, Emily couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't quite right. She paused for a moment, glancing around the dimly lit porch before stepping inside. The house seemed unusually cold, even though the thermostat was set to a comfortable temperature. Her heart began to race as she noticed that the living room curtains were slightly askew, something she was certain she had left perfectly closed earlier that morning. Taking a deep breath, Emily called out softly, "Hello? Is anyone here?" Her voice echoed through the empty rooms, but there was no response. Still, an unsettling sensation crept over her as she moved cautiously toward the kitchen. That's when she saw a faint trail of muddy footprints leading from the back door to the hallway. Panic surged through her veins, but before she could react, a shadow darted across the corner of her eye. Emily spun around, her pulse pounding wildly in her chest. There, standing in the doorway between the dining room and the kitchen, was a man she didn't recognize. He wore a dark hoodie pulled low over his face, and his hands were tucked into the pockets of his jeans. For a brief second, their eyes met, and Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Without thinking twice, she turned and ran toward the front door, fumbling with the lock in her haste. But it was too late. The stranger lunged forward, grabbing her arm and pulling her backward with surprising strength. Emily screamed, struggling against his grip, but he quickly covered her mouth with one hand while pressing a sharp object against her throat with the other. "Shut up," he hissed menacingly, his voice laced with anger and desperation. Tears streamed down Emily's cheeks as she realized the gravity of her situation. This wasn't just a random break-in. This man meant to harm her. In those final moments, Emily's mind raced frantically, trying to piece together any clues about what had led to this nightmare. Had someone been watching her? Was this personal or simply bad luck? As darkness enveloped her vision, she wondered if anyone would ever uncover the truth behind her tragic fate. Days passed, and the residents of Willow Creek whispered nervously among themselves about the disappearance of Emily Carter. Detectives arrived from the nearby city to investigate, combing through her home for evidence. They found signs of struggle-broken furniture, scattered belongings, but no definitive leads. CCTV footage from neighboring houses revealed nothing more than a shadowy figure slipping into Emily's yard shortly before midnight on the night she vanished. One evening, as Detective Mark Thompson reviewed the case files once again, he received an anonymous tip via email. Attached was a grainy photo taken from a security camera at a gas station several miles away. The image showed a man matching the description provided by Emily's neighbors, purchasing snacks and fuel hours after the estimated time of her death. His license plate number was partially obscured, but enough digits remained visible to narrow down potential suspects. Mark followed up on the lead, eventually identifying the man as Ryan Moore, a former employee of the company where Emily worked. Records indicated that Ryan had been fired under suspicious circumstances 6 months prior, citing misconduct allegations that were never fully resolved. Could jealousy or revenge have driven him to such extremes? Meanwhile, strange occurrences began plaguing the Carter household. Neighbors reported hearing faint cries emanating from within the walls late at night, despite the property being sealed off by police tape. Some claimed they spotted a translucent figure wandering aimlessly around the backyard, its form vaguely resembling that of Emily. These accounts reached the ears of paranormal investigator Lisa Grayson, who decided to pay the house a visit. Upon entering the premises, Lisa immediately sensed an overwhelming aura of sadness and anger permeating the air. Using her equipment, she recorded numerous EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, during her investigation. One recording stood out in particular, soft yet distinct whisper repeating the words, "Find me, please find me." Chills ran down Lisa's spine as she replayed the message multiple times, convinced it originated from Emily herself. Determined to help bring closure to both the victim and the community, Lisa conducted a séance in the living room where the initial attack occurred. Surrounded by candles flickering ominously in the drafty space, she focused all her energy on establishing contact with the restless spirit. After several minutes of tense silence, a cold gust swept through the room, extinguishing one of the flames. Then, in a voice barely above a murmur, Emily spoke. "I trusted him. We worked together. He said he cared about me." The words came haltingly, each syllable filled with anguish. Through further communication, Lisa learned that Ryan had manipulated Emily into believing they shared a romantic connection, using this trust to gain access to her home. Once inside, his true intentions became clear. He intended to rob her, but things escalated violently when she resisted. With newfound determination, Lisa shared her findings with Detective Thompson. Armed with additional evidence pointing directly to Ryan Moore, law enforcement tracked him down to a remote cabin nestled deep within the woods surrounding Willow Creek. Inside, they discovered incriminating items linking him to Emily's murder, including blood-stained clothing and a journal detailing his twisted obsession with her. Ryan confessed during interrogation, admitting not only to killing Emily, but also hinting at past crimes committed in other states under similar pretenses. His capture brought relief to the grieving town, though questions lingered regarding the supernatural phenomena experienced near Emily's home. Some believed her spirit remained bound to the place until justice was served, while others attributed the events to mere coincidence. Years later, the house on Maple Street still stands vacant, its windows boarded up and vines creeping steadily along the exterior walls. On quiet nights, locals claim to hear faint echoes of laughter mingled with sorrowful sobs drifting through the air. Whether these sounds stem from residual energy left behind by Emily or merely the imagination of frightened minds remains uncertain. What is undeniable, however, is the impact her story has had on everyone touched by its tragedy. The Demon House of Indiana. The Demon House of Indiana. It was a crisp autumn evening in the small town of Elkhart, Indiana. The sun had just set behind the rolling hills, casting long shadows across the landscape. A soft breeze rustled through the trees as 15-year-old Emily Carter walked home from her after-school job at the local diner. She carried with her a flashlight, its beam cutting through the gathering darkness. As she passed by the old Johnson mansion on Maple Street, Emily couldn't help but feel an uneasy sensation creep over her. The house had always been talked about in whispers among the townsfolk, stories of strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena that had driven away several families over the years. But tonight, something felt different. Emily paused outside the wrought iron gate, her breath visible in the cool air. The house stood silent against the night sky, its windows dark and empty like hollow eyes. Yet there was movement inside, faint flickers of light dancing across the upstairs bedroom. Her curiosity piqued. She hesitated before stepping closer to the front door. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was oppressive. The air carried a heavy, metallic scent that made Emily's stomach churn. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper peeling at the edges, revealing patches of damp plaster beneath. An antique grandfather clock ticked loudly in the corner, each second echoing through the cavernous space. At precisely 7:30 p.m., Emily heard it, a low, guttural growl emanating from somewhere deep within the house. It wasn't animalistic. This sound carried an intelligence, a malevolence that sent chills down her spine. She froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the flashlight still hanging from her belt. Upstairs, in what had once been the master bedroom, Emily discovered the source of the disturbance. The room was filled with an eerie greenish glow, emanating from a large mirror that hung crookedly on the wall. As she approached, the reflection in the glass began to change, not just her own image, but shapes shifting and contorting beyond comprehension. A sudden drop in temperature caused Emily's breath to fog again, even indoors. The air seemed to thicken, becoming almost tangible around her. From the corner of her eye, she noticed movement, shadowy figures darting just out of sight whenever she turned to look directly at them. Her heart raced, pounding in her chest like a trapped bird. In the kitchen, Emily found evidence of previous occupants' desperate attempts to combat whatever force inhabited the house. Salt lines crisscrossed the floorboards, their patterns complex and deliberate. Burnt offerings lay scattered across the countertops, their ashes mingling with strange symbols drawn in chalk on the walls. Among these markings was one particularly disturbing phrase repeated over and over: "They see us." As midnight approached, the activity intensified. Doors slammed shut on their own, creating sharp cracks that reverberated through the house. Footsteps echoed from above, though no one else was present. The sound of children laughing carried through the halls, only to be followed by anguished screams that made Emily's blood run cold. In the basement, where the temperature remained consistently below freezing despite the season, Emily uncovered the most chilling discovery. There, chained to the far wall, was a series of journals belonging to the original owners of the house, the Johnson family. Their entries detailed increasingly horrifying encounters with an entity they referred to as the Watcher. Page after page described sleepless nights filled with whispers, cold spots, and the feeling of being constantly observed. One particular entry, dated 3 days before the family mysteriously disappeared, struck a chord with Emily. In it, Mr. Johnson wrote about seeing his own reflection move independently of his body while standing in front of the same mirror she'd encountered earlier. He described how his reflection had smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of lips that didn't match his own expression. By now, the time was nearing 2:00 a.m. Emily realized she needed to leave immediately, yet something compelled her to stay. Perhaps it was the scientist within her yearning for answers, or maybe the entity itself was manipulating her thoughts. Whatever the reason, she found herself drawn back to the upstairs bedroom and that accursed mirror. Standing before it once more, Emily watched as the reflection transformed completely. No longer did it resemble her own image. Instead, a grotesque figure emerged, humanoid yet twisted, its features melting and reforming like wax caught between worlds. Its eyes burned with an unnatural light, and when it spoke, its voice resonated through her very soul. "You shouldn't have come here," it whispered, the words carrying weight far beyond their simple meaning. Emily felt her knees weaken, her body trembling uncontrollably. Behind her, the grandfather clock stopped ticking altogether, leaving an unsettling silence that pressed against her ears. Just as dawn began to break, painting the horizon with hues of pink and gold, Emily managed to escape the house. As she sprinted down the driveway, she glanced back one final time to see the curtains moving on their own, despite the windows being firmly shut. The house seemed alive, pulsing with energy that defied explanation. Back in town, Emily sought out Reverend Thompson, known for his expertise in paranormal phenomena. Together, they conducted extensive research into the history of the Johnson mansion, uncovering records of similar incidents dating back centuries. The land itself held significance, once used by Native American tribes for ceremonies involving spirits and otherworldly beings. Over the following weeks, Emily returned to the house multiple times, each visit bringing new revelations. She documented every occurrence meticulously, capturing audio recordings of disembodied voices and video footage of objects moving without explanation. One evening, during a particularly intense session, she captured what would become known as the Elkhart Whisper, a recording of clear, intelligible speech emanating from nowhere, warning anyone who listened to stay away from the property. Word spread quickly throughout the community, drawing attention from paranormal investigators across the country. National news outlets picked up the story, dubbing the Johnson Mansion the Demon House of Indiana. Experts came and went, each leaving more perplexed than when they arrived. Despite numerous attempts to cleanse the property using both traditional and spiritual methods, the entity remained undeterred. Months later, the decision was made to demolish the house entirely. On a chilly December morning, bulldozers moved in under heavy security, their engines roaring as they tore into the structure piece by piece. Yet even as the final walls collapsed, witnesses reported seeing ghostly figures ascending into the sky, their forms dissolving into nothingness. Today, all that remains is an empty lot surrounded by caution tape. Locals avoid the area after dark, claiming to hear faint echoes of laughter and crying coming from the ground beneath their feet. Emily continues her work as a paranormal investigator, though she never speaks publicly about her experiences at the Johnson Mansion. When asked why, she simply smiles and says, "Some things are better left buried." The town abandoned overnight out of fear. The sun had just begun its descent over the quiet town of Black Hollow, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. It was a peaceful evening in late October, the kind where golden hues painted the horizon and leaves crunched underfoot as people strolled through the main square. Children laughed while playing tag near the old fountain, their giggles echoing off brick buildings adorned with flickering lanterns. The bakery on Maple Street sent wafts of freshly baked bread into the crisp air, mingling with the scent of pumpkin spice from Mrs. Carter's cafe. Everything seemed perfect until it wasn't. It all started with whispers. At first, no one paid much attention. Whispers were common in small towns like Black Hollow. But these weren't ordinary murmurs. They carried an unsettling tone, something that made your skin prickle even before you understood what was being said. By dusk, those whispers turned into hushed conversations among neighbors standing outside their homes, glancing nervously at the forest beyond the edge of town. That forest, the one everyone knew but never ventured too far into, had always been shrouded in mystery. Now, though, there was fear. At precisely 7:13 p.m., the church bells rang out not for prayer or celebration, but for alarm. Their tolling cut through the stillness, reverberating throughout the valley like a warning shot fired into the night sky. People stopped mid-step, turning their heads toward the sound. Some clutched their children closer, others exchanged uneasy glances. Within minutes, panic spread like wildfire. Doors slammed shut, windows darkened, and soon the once vibrant streets stood eerily empty. But why? What could possibly cause an entire town to abandon everything so suddenly? Let's rewind a little. Earlier that day, around noon, a man named Henry Reed returned from hunting in the woods. He wasn't alone when he stumbled back into town. Clutching his rifle tightly, he dragged behind him a creature, or rather, something that resembled one. Its body was twisted, elongated limbs ending in claw-like hands. Its face, well, let's just say it didn't have any features you'd recognize. Instead, it bore gaping holes where eyes should have been, and its mouth stretched impossibly wide, filled with jagged teeth. Henry claimed he found it lurking near the creek, watching him silently. When he tried to scare it away, it lunged at him. Barely escaping with his life, he brought it back to prove it wasn't some wild hallucination. News traveled fast in Black Hollow. By early afternoon, nearly every resident had gathered in the town hall to see the thing for themselves. They stared in horror, some crossing themselves, others muttering prayers under their breath. No one spoke aloud about what this might mean, but everyone felt it deep down, a creeping dread that settled in their bones. As the hours passed, strange occurrences began unfolding around town. Around 4:00 p.m., Mrs. Harper reported hearing screams coming from the direction of the cemetery. She described them as guttural, animalistic, yet unmistakably human. Then came reports of livestock going missing from farms on the outskirts. Chickens vanished without a trace, cows left with nothing more than bloody hoofprints marking the ground. And then there were the light greenish glows seen flickering between the trees after sunset. Those who dared investigate never came back. By 6:00 p.m., tension reached a breaking point. Families packed whatever belongings they could carry, loading wagons hastily. Horses whinnied nervously, sensing the unease. Older residents recounted tales passed down through generation stories of the Watchers, entities said to dwell within the forest, waiting patiently for trespassers. These legends warned against disturbing their domain, lest they awaken and unleash unspeakable horrors upon the world. And now, here we are. As the clock struck 8:00 p.m., Black Hollow became a ghost town. Wagons rattled down dirt roads leading out of the valley, carrying families desperate to escape whatever nightmare awaited them inside those woods. Lanterns swayed gently in the breeze, illuminating tear-streaked faces and frightened expressions. Behind them, the forest loomed ominously, its dense canopy swallowing the last rays of sunlight. Somewhere deep within, faint whispers carried on the wind, growing louder with each passing moment. Imagine yourself walking through Black Hollow today. The streets remain untouched by time, frozen in place as if waiting for its inhabitants to return. Cobwebs drape over doorways, vines creep up walls, and rusted signs sway lazily in the breeze. Yet, amidst the decay, there's an eerie sense of life, of eyes watching from unseen places. You can almost hear the echoes of laughter, footsteps, and distant voices carried by the wind. Is it merely the remnants of memory clinging to this forsaken place, or is it something darker? If you venture close enough to the forest edge, you might notice peculiar markings etched into tree trunk symbols resembling ancient runes. Locals who stayed behind swore they appeared overnight, glowing faintly green beneath moonlight. Touching them brings chills racing up your spine, accompanied by a low hum resonating deep within your chest. Some claim the forest itself has grown since that fateful night, expanding outward like living tendrils consuming everything in its path. Inside the woods, reality shifts. Time becomes distorted, seconds stretching into eternity. Shadows move independently of light sources, twisting and writhing like serpents. Voices call out your name, though no one else is present. If you're brave, you're foolish enough to press further, you'll encounter remnants of past visitors, discarded tools, broken lanterns, fragments of clothing caught on branches. Each item tells a story of someone who entered seeking answers and never returned. What happened to Black Hollow remains a mystery to this day. Official records state the town was abandoned due to economic hardship, but locals know better. They speak of the Watchers in hushed tones, warning travelers to steer clear of the area. Occasionally, curious souls ignore such advice, disappearing without a trace. Others report seeing figures moving within the trees during twilight, shapes that vanish upon closer inspection. Perhaps the greatest tragedy isn't the loss of Black Hollow itself, but the lessons forgotten by those who survived. Fear drove them away, leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions and haunting memories. For some, running wasn't enough. Legends persist of sightings along nearby highways, families driving aimlessly, unable to find their way home, doomed to relive that terrible night forever. The winged creature that foretold disaster. The winged creature that foretold disaster. It was a chilly October evening in the small town of Elmwood, nestled deep within the heart of Pennsylvania. The leaves had begun their annual transformation into vibrant hues of red and gold, carpeting the streets with nature's artwork. But this particular night felt differentially still, as if the world itself held its breath. At exactly 8:15 p.m., Emily Carter sat on her porch swing, sipping hot cocoa while staring at the darkening sky above. Emily lived alone in an old Victorian house that had been in her family for generations. Built in the late 1800s, it stood tall and imposing, its wooden beams creaking softly with every gust of wind. She loved this place despite its drafty attic, squeaky floorboards, and the occasional shadowy figure she swore she saw out of the corner of her eye. Tonight, however, there was something unsettling about the air around her home. It wasn't just the crisp autumn breeze or the distant howl of a lone coyote, it was the feeling that someone or something was watching her from beyond the tree line. At precisely 8:23 p.m., Emily noticed movement in the trees across the road. Her curiosity piqued. She leaned forward slightly, squinting to make out what it could be. Then it happened. A massive winged creature emerged from the shadows, gliding silently over the treetops before disappearing again into the darkness. Its wingspan must have been at least 15 feet wide, and its silhouette resembled no bird native to Pennsylvania. A shiver ran down Emily's spine as she realized this was not a mere hallucination brought on by fatigue. Whatever it was real. She paused, trying to process what she'd seen. Was it some kind of rare owl? No, owls didn't fly like that, too graceful, too deliberate. Could it have been a drone? Unlikely, given the size and eerie silence. Whatever it was, it left behind an overwhelming sense of dread that lingered long after it vanished. Emily shook her head, telling herself it was probably nothing more than stress manifesting in strange ways. Still, she couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her gut. By 8:45 p.m., Emily decided it would be best to go inside. As she stepped onto the porch, she glanced back one last time toward the forest. To her astonishment, two glowing eyes now stared directly at her from the edge of the woods. They were unnatural, almost otherworldly, pulsating faintly like lanterns swaying in the wind. Her heart raced as panic set in. Without thinking, she slammed the door shut behind her, locking it tightly before collapsing against the wall. Her breathing came in short, ragged gasps as she tried to calm herself. Inside the house, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Shadows seemed darker, corners deeper, and the once comforting creaks of the old building now sounded menacing. Emily turned on all the lights, flooding each room with artificial brightness in hopes of warding off the creeping fear. Yet even the harsh glow couldn't mask the oppressive weight pressing down on her chest. Somewhere deep within the house, a faint scratching noise began, soft enough to ignore, but persistent enough to unnerve her further. Minutes ticked by slowly, each second stretching longer than the last. By 9:12 p.m., the scratching grew louder, evolving into a rhythmic tapping sound that echoed through the halls. It reminded Emily of fingernails drumming against glass, though she knew full well there were no fingers attached to whatever made the noise. She grabbed her phone instinctively, dialing the number for Sheriff Markson, who had always been approachable during community events. After 3 rings, he answered groggily. "Elmwood Sheriff's Office," he said, his voice tinged with sleepiness. "Sheriff Markson?" Emily whispered urgently, her throat dry. "It's Emily Carter. I need your help." Markson yawned audibly before responding. "Emily? What's wrong? Is everything okay?" "I don't know how to explain it." She hesitated, unsure whether he'd believe her story. "There's something outside my house. Something. Not normal." A pause followed, then a sigh. "Look, Emily, I appreciate you calling, but we're pretty swamped right now dealing with vandalism reports downtown. If you hear anything suspicious, call 911 immediately, all right?" Before she could respond, the line went dead. Frustrated and scared, Emily placed her phone face down on the kitchen counter. She debated leaving the house entirely, but dismissed the idea almost instantly. The roads at night were rarely safe, especially with wildlife roaming freely. Instead, she barricaded herself in the living room, pulling an antique rifle from beneath the couch where her grandfather used to keep it just in case. Time dragged on excruciatingly slow. By 7 p.m., the tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by an ominous silence that filled the house like fog seeping through cracks in the walls. Emily clutched the rifle tighter, her knuckles turning white. Just when she thought things couldn't get worse, a deafening crash shattered the peace. One of the upstairs windows exploded inward, shards of glass raining onto the hardwood floors below. A shrill screech pierced the air, echoing so loudly it rattled the very foundations of the house. Frozen in terror, Emily watched as the winged creature finally revealed itself in full glory or horror, depending on perspective. Its body was jet black, covered in feathers that shimmered faintly under the moonlight streaming through broken panes. Eyes glowing brighter than before locked onto hers, filled with intelligence and malice. Claws scraped against the floor as it advanced cautiously, testing the boundaries of the space between them. For several agonizing moments, they simply stared at each other, predator and prey frozen in a deadly standoff. Emily's mind raced, searching for any possible escape route. Behind her lay the front door, tantalizingly close, yet impossibly far due to the sheer size of the thing blocking her path. To either side were closed doors leading to bedrooms and closets known, offering viable options for retreat. Her only hope rested in the weapon trembling in her hands. Summoning every ounce of courage she possessed, Emily raised the rifle and aimed directly at the creature's head. Her hand shook violently, betraying her inner turmoil. The barrel wavered, pointing alternately at its eyes, beak, and chest. Finally, she steadied herself enough to pull the trigger. The report thundered through the house, reverberating off walls and ceilings alike. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, with a blood-curdling shriek, the creature recoiled, stumbling backward into the hallway. Seizing the opportunity, Emily bolted toward the front door, wrenching it open and sprinting barefoot onto the porch. Cold air slapped her cheeks as adrenaline coursed through her veins. Behind her, the creature let out another ear-splitting cry, this time accompanied by flapping wings powerful enough to rattle the entire structure. Desperate to put distance between herself and the monstrosity, Emily leapt down the steps and dashed across the lawn, heading straight for the safety of her neighbor's property. Mrs. Henderson, a retired schoolteacher known for her kindness and wisdom, often kept a light burning late into the night. Sure enough, as Emily approached, she spotted a warm glow spilling through partially drawn curtains. Summoning what little breath remained in her lungs, she pounded furiously on the door. Footsteps echoed inside moments later, followed by Mrs. Henderson opening the door wearing a floral-patterned robe and spectacles perched precariously on her nose. "Emily!" she exclaimed, clearly startled. "What on earth is going on?" Without wasting time on pleasantries, Emily pushed past her into the cozy living room. Only then did she allow herself to collapse onto the nearest chair, tears streaming down her face as reality crashed down upon her. Between sobs, she recounted everything: the sighting earlier, the intrusion, the attack, and pleaded with Mrs. Henderson to call the authorities. To her surprise, instead of dismissing the tale as fanciful nonsense, Mrs. Henderson listened intently, nodding occasionally as though confirming suspicions already formed in her mind. When Emily finished speaking, she sighed deeply, removing her glasses to clean them methodically. "You may find this hard to believe, dear," she began carefully, choosing her words with precision, "but stories similar to yours have circulated among residents here for decades. Some call it the Black Shuck. Others refer to it as the Harbinger. Whatever name you choose, people say it appears shortly before tragedy strikes." Emily stared at her, horrified. "Tragedy? You mean something bad is going to happen?" Mrs. Henderson nodded solemnly. "Yes. And based on historical patterns, it tends to affect those closest to whoever witnesses the creature first. Panic surged anew within Emily, threatening to overwhelm her fragile state of mind. Questions bombarded her thought show. Much time did she have? Who else might be endangered? Was there anything they could do to prevent the impending doom? As dawn broke over Elmwood, casting golden rays across rooftops and fields alike, both women resolved to uncover the truth behind the winged harbinger. Their journey led them through dusty archives, interviews with elderly locals, and visits to sites rumored to hold significance in relation to the creature. Along the way, they discovered chilling details accounts of missing persons, unexplained fires, and accidents occurring mere days after reported sightings. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the revelation concerning the origin of the beast itself. According to legend passed down through generations, it was once a guardian spirit tasked with protecting the land and its inhabitants. However, greed and corruption drove humans to exploit natural resources recklessly, angering the entity until it transformed into a malevolent force bent on vengeance. Armed with newfound knowledge, Emily and Mrs. Henderson devised a plan to confront the creature once more, hoping to restore balance between worlds before disaster struck. Preparations took hours, involving gathering sacred herbs, crafting protective charms, and learning ancient chants believed to appease vengeful spirits. By midnight, they stood ready, hearts pounding with anticipation mixed with dread. Underneath the silver glow of a crescent moon, they ventured back to Emily's house, now eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by gentle breezes. As expected, the winged harbinger awaited them, silhouetted against the starry sky atop the roof. Its presence exuded raw power, commanding respect and fear simultaneously. With steady voices resonating together, Emily and Mrs. Henderson recited the chant word for word, pouring every ounce of conviction into their tones. Slowly, visibly affected by the incantation, the creature lowered its head, wings folding gracefully against its sides. In that moment, a connection formed in understanding transcending language barriers and cultural differences. When the ritual concluded, the winged harbinger spread its magnificent wings wide before ascending skyward, disappearing into the heavens without a trace. Left standing amidst remnants of shattered glass and splintered wood, Emily allowed herself a single tear of relief to fall. Though uncertainty remained regarding future encounters, one thing became clear: that night marked the beginning of healing rather than destruction. From then onward, tales of the winged harbinger evolved, shifting focus away from fear and towards reverence for forces beyond human comprehension. Residents of Elmwood embraced traditions honoring harmony between man and nature, ensuring such tragedies never repeated themselves. And though Emily never forgot the harrowing ordeal, she carried forward lessons learned, becoming a beacon of hope and resilience for generations to come. Abducted by aliens? The first UFO